What's the best job you ever had?
All the joys of being your own boss. I think the only time I've really been truly happy working is when I own my own restaurants. Freedom of being able to create something that truly reflects you, who you are, and what you are is something that not everybody can appreciate. In any position, one has to answer to someone or something. I found it far easier to be beholden to customers than one individual. When you're away from something or something for a long time, you tend to always remember the good times. What you don't forget is the financial burden of 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. You tend to forget being so tired at times you could literally fall asleep standing up. You forget what it's like to deal with unruly customers, suppliers, and employees. When you're in business, it's nonstop. The daily obligation of having to be on your A game day in and day out, always trying to prove the best you can. And oftentimes you can wear yourself thin or lift yourself up. The day before I opened Park Ave, your mother dragged me to some memorial at Boston Church. I was beyond pissed that we had so much to do. And I always remember being in a men's room and looked over to see Anthony Athanas standing next to me. Mr. Athanas was a legend in the food business, owning some of the most prominent restaurants in the Boston area. He knew me only as Aphrodite's son-in-law. I told him that I was opening up my first restaurant the next day and if he had any advice. He looked off and said, when you work 100 hours a week, you can't worry about one employee who's doing a good job, who isn't doing a good job. He told me he would sit the person down and tell him I was up all night worrying about you, and you're affecting my business. You can't stay here any longer and you have to leave. I can tell you many times I've done the exact same thing and was surprised by people's reaction. At least 90% said thank you. They felt deep down the same way. They never stopped learning.
Which sports did you play in high school?
In my mind, I am one of the greatest athletes in high school history. The reality is that I pretty much sucked at everything that I tried. I love playing baseball and softball, but I have zero hand-eye coordination, which makes hitting and fielding difficult. I went up with a hockey team. I was a real clumsy skater and had no clue how to skate backwards, which was the essential part of the game. I went out for the golf team, but had no clue how to swing a club and was a major flaw that I couldn't be ignored. I even considered myself going out for tennis, but after watching a few of the matches, I had an idea back up on the shelf. Thank God we had intramural sports. Teams were essential to force pick you because they had to. So at least I got to play a little softball, baseball, and dodgeball occasionally. Then the summer between freshman and sophomore year, brand new high school opened up with our class size went from 500 to 250 in a heartbeat. And we had some pretty spectacular athletes that all of a sudden were gone. For better or worse, we had trouble getting a football team on the field in high school. In high school sports, the superiority is in the sheer number of players, not necessarily good players, but bodies that can be thrown onto the field. So here comes a 5-foot-inch, 165-pound center onto the field, junior and senior year. I spent the majority of my football career with Giorgiani's hands up my ass. Junior year was pretty good. I think we won 5 out of 8 games. And then it was like an entire team graduated. Our senior year was without question the worst team in the city and had a record to prove it. 0-8 and 68 was our cry. Still kind of funny when we get together and hear that being yelled out.
How did you meet your spouse, and how did you know you wanted to marry them?
Well, in January 1977, I lost my job in Chicago and had to move back to Worcester. Totally broke and disheartened and not looking forward to having to move back in with Mom. A week or so after I got home, the Albanian American National Organization, ANO, was putting on their winter dance at Nick's Grill. Olga thought it would brighten my mood to attend, so I went. Sometimes during the evening, I'd glance at this beautiful girl across the room and went over to talk to her. She and a whole bunch of friends were talking snow skiing, so I jumped into the conversation, and we danced and had a good time. And she told him she was staying at Teta V's house, and I said out of nowhere, "You want to go to church tomorrow?" She said yes. It was one of the coldest days of the year, and the heat was out at the church. I thought we were going to freeze to death. We spoke several times on the phone, and every February the ANO held a basketball tournament in Southbridge. And everyone was going, so I went knowing full well that she would be there. God, we had a ball. I'll never forget we tried to find a place to eat and found an all-night Greek diner. We were so drunk we fell asleep at the table. Next thing we knew, the cook was banging his pots together to wake us up. It was the time that weekend that we both realized that it was special and serious. The more around her, the more I was convinced that she and me were only together. Looking back, I decided to marry the sweetheart the moment I laid eyes on her. Something about her was calming and reassuring. And honestly, I thought it didn't get more quickly. And there, so it goes. At least we've been in love for 42 years.
What was your dad like when you were a child?
Well, Mitri was a very complicated guy. Most of the time he was very quiet, but he could erupt in a minute. I always sensed that he was trying to do the right thing, but was overshadowed by a very dominant wife. He wasn't a lovey-dovey type and could be kind of cold in a lot of ways. His early life, I assume, was very difficult, and somehow he found his way to America from Albania. I always felt that he loved us, but in his own quiet way. The main problem I have, and still have to this day, is there was no penetrating to how he really felt about things. He had some strong views on some things that still disturb me. He did carry a lot of ill towards many, and it could be uncomfortable at times. Yet he had his moments and could be hysterical in a lot of ways. In the early 60s, there was talk of reparations from the German government. And he and my Aunt Victoria went to Albania expecting a financial windfall. But things came back, and I imagine things didn't go too smoothly. I do remember that he bought me a switchblade knife shaped like a pistol. I played with that thing for a day or so, and it disappeared. My mother was at work again. In the 50s, things like attending sporting events that were not high on his list. I don't think he felt comfortable that I had a strong relationship with Jack and Mono, but he never complained. You just got that sense. The one thing I remember is that you may not have a lot, but he always had food on the table and clothes on our backs. He was a tremendously hard worker and felt that providing necessaries in his family took precedence over everything else. He was strongly tied to our church, insisting that we never live too far away. Easter was his big week of the year, and he looked forward to being with his buddies to do the responses during liturgy. And that's the happiest we ever saw him all year. Nothing mattered more to him than family. Every Sunday we were at somebody's house. Birthdays, name days, any excuse get together. And he would shine when it was our turn to have guests at our house. He was just a tremendous cook. I just found out his great-grandson in Albania, he was a chef. Love of food and cooking must be genetic. He worked nights and my mother worked days. And I can remember him making sure we had dinner ready before my mother got home. He was very political when it came to Albania. I remember all the discussions about what was going on in the homeland. His big event every year was a September picnic in Millbury. And he said it was great to see all the men drinking raki and singing old Albanian folk songs and whipping down shish kebab. He would talk about the gathering for weeks. Of course, there was a lot of heated exchanges, but they were always civil. My biggest regret is that I never concerned him to talk about his early life and our family in Albania. Sadly, when I was 18, his life came to a tragic end, which I'll never be able to deal with.
Do you want to talk any more about that?
Hmm?
Do you want to talk any more about that? No?
Tell them about the class picture with the football team with Jaji Yanni wore.
They had pads and shirts, and they both had footballs in their hand. It was Giorgiani and Billy, I can't remember his last name. He went on to West Point and just retired as a four-star general. But they were standing there, and they were supposed to crop the picture, and they left it. And there's their knees, black socks, and black shoes. It looked absolutely hysterical. Oh.
Oh.
What is one of your favorite memories of your mother?
Oh, that's like which one of your kids do you love most questions. There's so many great memories of Nana. She was the first person I could speak to without being afraid of what I might say. I was in kindergarten. I remember coming home and Nana would have some milk and cookies for me and ask me about my day. She seemed so genuinely to care about what I had to say at such a young age. It's really hard to pick out a few of the great memories I have of her. She was kind, loving, hardworking, and took no shit from anybody. In a lot of ways, she was a woman's lib advocate way before her time. She had a strong, independent mold about her that became more impressive as I grew and tried to understand her more. I always remember our times at the beach and how we would turn into a kid in the ocean. We would bury each other in the sand. Every weekend was spent with family and how much we enjoyed our crew. They would talk and drink coffee and eat for endless hours, and I was able to catch a little insight in how her mind worked. The one memory that sticks out was her fierce loyalty. Whether it was a family or friends, they were never wrong in her mind. She often took a stand but was never one to scrutinize others for views that they held. One lesson I remind myself of constantly, this urge to know how someone reached a conclusion that they have. She was a tireless worker, and it was the Sunday school, church affairs, her family, her friends. She was like the Energizer bunny, never knowing when to slow down or stop.
Yep.
Lastly, my great memory is the bond that she formed with Mado Cacciadorian. I've yet to see two people so intertwined in their lives. How the two of them were able to bring that feeling down to Harry and I. It seems at times that we thought we could occur to her, what would Mado do in this situation? It was a friendship of love and admiration and love.
Tell me about your first boss.
Well, growing up, we were as close to dirt poor as you could get. Even though my parents never discussed our financial situation with us, we always felt the sense that a roof over our heads, food on the table, and clothes on our backs was about as far as it went. As the youngest, I felt anything I could do to help out and have a little spending money was basically do anything I could help. Shoveling snow, cutting lawns, running errands, and even helping some of the ladies with housework became the norm. Just letting the neighbors know that if they needed help, I would always be available. Uncle Phil had a paper route at the time, and eventually he wanted to give it up, so I inherited the route. Back then, the T&G had a morning, evening, and Sunday schedule. I took the afternoon section. Trucks would drop off bundles of paper on the corner, and they would have to be rolled and folded so you could throw them. Papers were then loaded into a cart that I had to push and then deliver the papers to the neighbors. Rain, shine, or cold, snow, had to get up at 5 a.m. on Sunday and repeat this excerpt on Sunday paper. It was so big it couldn't be folded, so you had to carry each one, usually up 3 flights of stairs. And the Eagle flew on Friday, so you had to collect the money and keep an accurate record about people who would tip you. I kept that route for a few years and then gave it up. When I was about 5 or 6, the family moved to the 3rd floor building at the corner of Jakes Ave and Dale Street to 110 Chandler, which was maybe 50 yards away. As we were moving out of an Albanian family, the Boyatis moved into our apartment. The father, Tom, was a wonderful man, and we had a lifelong relationship. When I was a freshman in high school, Tom was the chef at the Broadway and made me an offer for the summer working the counter. Back then, the Broadway was a full-service restaurant serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Tom made them famous for the great specials they had. In addition, they had a bakery, and that was amazing, and they made their own ice cream. The Broadway owner was a crazy Jew named Sender Halpern. He was a character out of a movie, always screaming, yelling, accusing everyone of taking advantage of him, and so on. One night I'd been there for a few weeks, and the elderly man came in and ordered a hot fudge sundae. So I did the best I could, ice cream and not being my strong suit. Just as the old man was to dip his spoon, Sender came around the corner and snatched the sundae away, started screaming at me that I was screwing him, making a sundae so huge he was losing money. The next thing he said to me was, "Take it in the back and you eat it." And the lesson not to make sundaes so big so nobody could finish it. Bad move on his part. At least once every 3 weeks or so, I noticed Sender lurking around, and I'd make a gigantic sundae, and he'd come back and do the same thing and maybe going back and eat it. I was getting chunky. Not for the first time I gained 40 pounds. I think that was about 2 years and had a great time enjoying the hell out of Sender's Attics. Tom went open his own catering business and I helped him out when I could. I always remember that when I had Park Ave, Tom would come in and we would visit and reminisce. I had just sponsored a softball team and had some flags printed up with the Albanian flag and pass on it. I gave one to Tom and told him he was going to Albania to visit and asked me for a couple more. So I gave him 6 and thanked me and he left. A week later his son called me and told me that Tom had died in Albania at his boyhood home. He had my hat on.
Mm.